And now I am joined by Volodymyr Yelchenko, Ambassador, Permanent Representative of Ukraine to the United Nations in 2015-2019. Mr. Yelchenko, greetings and thanks for joining me today. So my first question to you would be as follows. Russia continues to commit crimes, shelling Ukrainian cities and killing innocent Ukrainians. Not even the arrest warrant issued by the International Criminal Court against the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, led to the suspension of the aggressor's membership in the UN Security Council, or at least its presidency. What other mechanisms exist for total restriction of the aggressor in the international arena?
Well, there are several ways to do it. I would prefer that our diplomats would raise the issue of Russian delegations' credentials, which was the case at least several times in UN history. For example, in 1956, after the Soviet Union invaded Hungary and installed the puppet regime there in Budapest, the credentials of the Hungarian delegation were suspended or frozen, and it continued at least for 2 years. Another example is South African Republic. During the times of apartheid regime in this country, starting from, if I remember correctly, from 1974 and until the first democratic elections in the country in 1994, when Nelson Mandela was elected the president, the credentials of the South African delegation were suspended. And delegation could not, well, they just didn't have a physical possibility to participate in the meetings, to vote, to deliver statements, and so on. So this is the easiest way, because if we go for expansion of Russia from the UN, it will take more time. And even if Russia is recognized as aggressor in Ukraine, the UN Charter is very vague, and it's not easy to collect enough votes in the General Assembly to expel Russia from the UN. It is possible, but it will take much more time, because many countries are simply afraid of the precedent. Today is Russia, tomorrow it will be our country.
But Mr. Yelchenko, how more time to your estimates?
I think that the best time would be on the eve of the next session of the General Assembly, which is to be convened in early September this year. Well, there is a credentials committee of the UN General Assembly, which, as a rule, has the first meeting before the session starts, a couple of days before it. It can be early September or the second week of September. And if we raise this issue in the Credentials Committee, I think that we can have a successful story. The other way is to use the credentials mechanism in the UN Security Council. Although this body is just one of the bodies of the United Nations, like the General Assembly, but they have their own rules of procedure. And in case when one or more delegations would question the credentials of the Russian delegation in the Security Council, this is going to be voted in the Council. And in this case, the veto right is not applicable, because this is the procedural question. This is not the substantial issue. In that case, you need just to collect 9 out of 15 votes, simple majority. And I think that given the composition of the Security Council, we can certainly have 9 or even more countries which would go for which would support our case and just suspend the credential delegation.
Ambassador, what did China change its attitude to Russian aggression in Ukraine so dramatically during the vote in UN General Assembly?
Well, it's not an easy question, but I think that, well, first of all, after the visit of head of People's Republic of China to Moscow. They had a couple of agreements which Russia started to break. Well, just a couple of days after. I mean, first of all, the transfer of nuclear weapons to the territory of Belarus, because we know for sure that China is one of the most adamant opponents of the use or threat of use of nuclear weapons. And I'm pretty sure that this was one of the topics during the conversations in Moscow. And President Putin, just ignored the agreements which were reached in Moscow. And secondly, during the visit of French President Macron to Beijing a couple of days later, they also talked about the same topic. And China was waiting. I think that the reason why China at least tried to be neutral during the first year of this terrible war is that they were not pretty sure what will be the final development of this war. Now they can see that they are certainly, in case if they would choose to support Russia, they would find themselves on the wrong side of history. That's why I think that, well, Chinese diplomacy and Chinese politics are very wise people. They calculated, very carefully what will be the circumstances, what will be the consequences of Chinese support of Russia. And the first consequence would be the new sanctions of the Western countries, United States and European Union against China, which is very bad for China because China needs economic development. China is very reliable on the Western European and American and Canadian and Japanese and South Korean technologies. They would certainly, if they have a choice, they would certainly choose, Western side rather than the Russian side. But it took some time. And after the telephone conversation between the Chinese leader and Ukrainian President Zelensky, I think the final decision was made in China, in Beijing. The final decision, unfortunately, is not to support Ukraine, but we still hope that is going to happen. But at least China from neutral, step by step, they are becoming, as I say, neutral positive. And the first sign of that and the first result was the positive vote in the General Assembly. Because, well, this is just one of the resolutions of the General Assembly. There's nothing dramatic about that. But what is important is that China, as you rightly said, for the first time, after many months, and even starting from 2014, when this war has started, that was the first time when China voted yes for the resolution where the Russian aggression against Ukraine is openly named. And what is even more important is that together with China, again, for the first time, countries like Brazil, India, or, for example, Kazakhstan and Armenia also supported this resolution. They voted yes. And the final result of this vote is that Russia was supported only by 4 countries. There were only 5 votes against this resolution: Russia, North Korea, Belarus, Syria, and Nicaragua.
Quite a company.
These are, this is the best company one can imagine.
Oh yeah.
The best countries in the world, the promoters of the human rights, and so on and so forth. Even during the Soviet time, the Soviet Union, even during the worst times after the invasion to Afghanistan, for example, the Soviet Union had a very solid support of many African, Asian, Latin American countries. But Russia overstepped even the best Soviet experience. So now they can be proud of having this mighty coalition of just 4 countries in favor of Russia.
Quite a good coalition. Ambassador, since you've been a permanent representative of Ukraine to the United Nations, you know this organization quite well from inside. And based on what you know, is the UN important to the world in its current form in order to solve such security issues as we have, for example, right now, unfortunately, in Ukraine?
You know, this is a very difficult question for me because I devoted at least half of my career or even more to the UN issues. But to be frank with you, I think that in the current shape, UN is I think it exhausted its potential, at least in the political sphere. Yes, the United Nations still delivers a lot of good things and good results, for example, in economic and financial sphere, in the fighting the climate change, even in the field of human rights, although there are, like the countries which I mentioned, the supporters of Russia, plus probably the Islamic Republic of Iran and a couple of more, they are still there, although they are the biggest violators of the human rights in the human history. But still, out of 193 members of the United Nations, the vast majority is devoted to human rights. And as I said, climate change. This is one of the issues which is probably not so important for Ukrainians right now, but this is a very important issue, and there should be some international organizations, dealing with that. But if you go back to 1945, to Yalta Conference and San Francisco Conference, when the UN Charter was elaborated and signed, this organization, first of all, was created for the sake of preserving peace. And the system of collective security, which was created by the UN Charter and later added by a number of very important regional organizations like the OSCE or even NATO and European Union, and there are many more other regional organizations, African Union, the League of Arab States, the Asian organizations, and they worked in unison for many, many decades. But now this system is about to collapse. You might say that it already collapsed. And it started not with the Russian invasion in Ukraine. It started from the events in the former Yugoslavia in the early 90s. Then we had the problems in many countries of Africa. We had Syrian conflict. We had Russian invasion in Georgia. And finally, occupation of Crimea and the large-scale war of Russia against Ukraine. All of it should have been prevented if the UN Charter would be recognized by all countries. But Russia seemed to ignore all existing international norms, the norms of international law, the UN Charter, the OSCE principles, and so on and so forth, which means that if organization is not able to prevent the major war in Europe, and I mentioned many other wars, the former Yugoslavia, in Africa, Arab-Israeli conflict, and, Syrian war, that means that the system is not working well. We remember what had happened to the League of Nations before the Second World War. I think that something like that is about to happen with the United Nations. I don't believe that this organization can be reformed, at least until Russia is a part of this organization, and not just the ordinary part, but the country which is a permanent member of the UN Security Council with the veto right.
Well, it's unfortunate.
While Russia is sitting there, we cannot say anything about the possibility of reforming this organization. So I think that after the Ukrainian victory in this war, the new organization should be launched. It is a difficult process. It's not easy. It will take not weeks and months. It may take years, but it needs to be done. And like after the Second World War, when the countries which were the victory coalition in that war, first of all, the United States, United Kingdom, later, well, Soviet Union, of course, and later joined by France and China. Now, I think that Ukraine, as one of the future victors in this war, should also play a very active part in the creation of the new organization.
And we will play. Mr. Yelchenko, Ambassador, thank you very much for joining me today and answering my questions. This was Volodymyr Yelchenko, Ambassador, Permanent Representative of Ukraine to the United Nations in 2015-2019.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Latest news, trends, and analytics on all about Ukraine. Like, share, and subscribe. Any questions, proposals, and comments, contact us via email.